Hey everybody, Lee Cool here with Smart Church Solutions. And I have a very special guest with me, Paul Connery. And Paul is the Director of Property and Assets with the Archdiocese of Hartford. So we have a very special treat for you today. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself a little better than I could?
Surely, talking to you from Hartford, Connecticut, um, and been in the church business now in different roles and facility roles for 22 years, and with the Archdiocese of Hartford. And prior to that, I worked 20 years or so in the hotel business, managing hotels. So had some unique facility experience through that role. So up here in beautiful New England, married, 3 kids, all out of the house. Enjoying life up here, and spend a lot of time with family and friends, and enjoy spending time in Newport, Rhode Island, where I have a place, and that's a big part of my life and my future retirement. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's everything's great. Enjoy. Looking forward to the conversation, Lee.
Yeah, and we were speaking prior to when I pressed the record button here. We're so thankful that you were willing to come and share your perspective with us. I think this is a very rare perspective that I think a lot of parishes and churches in general are going to benefit from. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time.
sure.
But I got to ask you, I know you mentioned you kind of come from quite a string of facilities things with the hotels and everything else, but what kind of led you to get into the role that you're in today?
Good question. So I came to the Archdiocese when I ran a hotel in Hartford, and one of my clients was the Archdiocese of Hartford. They had meetings there, and as the general manager, I got to know the Archbishop and his assistant, his secretary, chancellor, and one conversation led to another, and they had a facilities management position available at a property up in Bloomfield. It was a former seminary, 140,000 square foot property. And it was like a conference center, meeting space, offices, retirement center for priests, multi-purpose. So I ran that, and
Awesome.
they had an opening. I jumped on it, and was looking for a little change after being in the hotel business for quite a while, traveling around. I didn't really want to move again. So started that, and then in 2016, they started looking at the pastoral planning in the Archdiocese, which partly means that you got to consolidate based on our situation up here with the number of priests we have. So there was a plan put in place to consolidate and close a number of churches at that time, and they decided to develop this department called the Department of Property and Assets. And I interviewed for the director's job, and I was the first employee, wrote all the policies and procedures. And from there, when that now for a number of, how many years? It's been 5 years or so.
Yeah.
And at that time, we started the process of closing 27 churches. And then we started the process of marketing them. But our department does a lot of other things, but that's sort of how I got to where I am. And the work continues.
Oh man, you just opened up so many questions I have. First, it's so cool to see that you kind of walked the walk before getting into the director level, like the Archdiocese, managing facilities prior. How has your perspective shifted? I guess kind of managing the hotels, managing the facilities for churches, and now kind of being in this overarching position.
Yeah. So when I ran hotels, I was the general manager. Ultimately, I was general manager for, and so I ran the property. Mm-hmm. So I had a staff, and we made day-to-day and strategic decisions about service and hotel occupancy and capital plans for the buildings that we owned or managed. So that was one perspective. And certainly we needed to have the funds, and we needed to manage the contractors and all of that, and do it strategically based on, having a going concern.
Yeah.
Do that while running a hotel. Then once I got working for the church, the church is a little different. The way the way we're organized, there's two structures I understand as far as archdiocese and diocese. You could be corporate sole or corporate aggregate. Corporate sole means the archdiocese owns everything.
Mm.
Corporate aggregate is which we are, is every parish is a separate corporation. So it's, in that sense, it's a little bit, it's decentralized. I act more as an advisor to these parishes than I do as a director to them. I can advise and tell them what I think they should do, but in the end, it's a parish decision. They have their governing body, their trustees, the finance council, parish councils, and they have to decide how to manage their parish buildings, including maintenance, building maintenance, and capital planning. And so it's a little, sometimes I get a little frustrated because sometimes they don't follow the direction that we give them. I'm certainly going to raise. Oh, did I lose you?
No, I'm with you.
Okay. I certainly am going to raise the flag if I think they're making a really poor decision and do what we need to do to stop that. But in the end, parishes all are different. They have different levels of expertise. Some pastors really love managing buildings. Some pastors don't want anything to do with it, and they prefer to find strong finance council folks, or relying on my department or volunteers to help them. So it runs the gamut as far as the needs they have. And, you just pick and choose your spots. We stay engaged, though, because there are policies we have in order to stay engaged relative to certain permissions for capital projects over our threshold is 25,000. So I am engaged, but sometimes I'd rather be engaged sooner than later. We can talk certainly more about that.
I think I have an idea what you mean by that.
Yeah.
And so another thing that caught my attention, and this is awesome information, by the way. I know you mentioned that you were kind of the first person in your department creating some of the procedures and the processes. Right. I guess, how was that for you? And I know that's such an open-ended question, but I assume just with your experience being the general manager of the hotel and everything up to then, you probably had a good idea of what needed to be done.
They had a draft of a job description for me. Nowhere, some of it's accurate, but some of it isn't. Yeah. Thankfully, some of it isn't. You're starting from ground up. So I had to decide what kind of staffing levels I needed. And we were ramping up at that time because we didn't have any work. And, so we were really preparing ourselves for the inevitability of having a number of churches. So they had designated a church closed. It doesn't mean it's designated for sale. So the Archdiocese just designated that they were closing these churches, and then the parishes decided when they wanted to put them on the market. So we had to ramp ourselves up to anticipate that. And, because right after churches were announced closed, some parishes jumped right on it and said, we want to sell this right away. So we needed to set up the structure in order to do the real estate process, from, appraising the properties, to getting them listed, to dealing with sacred articles, to working with brokers, to, dealing with attorneys, and ultimately buyers, and negotiating contracts in order to get the deal closed. So we needed to process in order to do that effectively, which took a lot of time. It's like 75 plus or minus steps we follow, because we have to follow canon law as well as civil law. And canon law, the primary issues are, when you're selling a church, you have to ultimately relegate the church, meaning it no longer, it ceases to be a church. It's relegated to profane use, as they call it. And so we really had to set up that process from the get-go. And then we built our structure around other parts of our deliverables. We do other things in our department as far as risk management. We do property management work. We help with project management. We advise on capital planning. We help with, vendor management. We we assist parishes with capital planning long-term. So there's a lot of other parts to our department, but the primary first one that we really had to get our heads around was the real estate. And we had to develop a complete, and I know we'll talk more about it, but we needed to develop a database to know exactly how many buildings we had where and what the use was and conditions were. And that still goes on today.
Wow.
A monster. So we really had to work hard. And I hired one person to help me, this woman who's still with me. She's now a project manager. And we started, looking at databases and things. So we can talk more about that, of that. And then ultimately a couple of years, 3 years ago, I'm not sure how many years, we hired another project manager. So there's three of us on my team. And so we each take different parts of the business and different projects. I have, I think 40 different projects going on right now. And we all manage those different projects but that's just the real estate. So it was from ground up. And, we made our mistakes, but I'm pretty proud of what we've accomplished. And we're delivering service now. And, people are relying on us to help them. And, the work keeps going. So
I didn't realize how much was involved. That's amazing. I mean, and every aspect you just shared there is so deep. In terms of the details that go into it.
Yeah, it is
amazing.
You gotta really have a robust system of keeping track of it all, because you gotta follow a process in order to get it to the finish line, from getting permission to market it to getting it to this the closing day, and it's just everything in between. And so you can't mess it up. You're talking about an asset. You're talking about bringing the parish, monetizing an asset for them and getting them the highest return on that asset. And so you want to do it right, and
yeah,
I think we've done pretty well. We've made some mistakes. We've learned along the way. We've adjusted and tweaked, but we're doing fine.
I'm just amazed you built that from scratch. I mean, that whole process, that's just incredible.
Yeah, it was quite a deal.
That was news to me. Well, I know you mentioned a little about the job description draft they had for you when you got started, how that's evolved quite a bit. I can only imagine since.
Yeah.
What is some of your favorite parts of your job?
Lee, one of the things is no day is the same. You get calls on a variety of things to assist people, be it real estate, be it property management, be it contracts, helping, or leases. We do a lot of lease management too. It just, no day is the same. So that makes it fun. And I'm blessed to have a great team of people, two people that I really enjoy working with. I love them. They're the best. And, we work really well together and try to have a good time while we're doing this.
That's awesome.
So, yeah. And you really come across some really great people too out there in the field, between the pastors and the volunteers and staff people they have at the parish level. They want help, and they call you, and they tell you what they need, and you work together. So every day is just different. We have somewhat of a structure, but it's I can't tell you. There's never been some days are really crazy. You just don't know where the hours went. And other days you might have a little more control. But it varies. Like when I'm done with the call with you, I'm going to be driving to Ansonia, Connecticut. I'm going to be up walking an attic with a priest, looking at the ceilings, and so I'm serious. I got to get my jeans on and get dirty.
Oh my gosh. So is that like a capital project you're going to look at with him for? Or?
It's probably not, I wouldn't call it a capital project. It's more of a repair project. Okay. They have some roof issues, and they have a cross that's pretty high up, about 120 feet, that's sort of falling over. It's tipping.
Gotcha.
So he called me up the other day and said, I need your help. And I was like, I got to go down there and look at this. I can't visualize what you need. And so I'm going to go down there and, kick the tires and help them out and see what we can do to get a project going for them.
That involvement's great. And when exactly, I think you mentioned earlier there was a certain threshold, but when does the Archdiocese get involved with that kind of stuff exactly?
So the threshold is $25,000.
Okay. Got it.
Parish, they have their own operating budget every year, and they have cash flow that they have to manage, and, they raise money and have offertories, and, they spend their money wisely. And if they have a project, be it, let's say, roof replacement or paving, repaving of a parking lot, or a boiler replacement, or windows work, or whatever it may be, if it's over 25,000, they have to write a permission letter to the Archdiocese. And we have a committee that reviews the letter and reviews the bids and make sure they conform to, the proper process to get a project from start to finish. So we don't try to get in their way, but we help them make the right decisions. We make sure that they have the monies available and that they've bid these properly. I mean, that's my department gets involved a lot with making sure that these bids are apples to apples. A lot of times in big projects, Lee, the best friend or the worst friend is an architect or an engineer, because that's, they don't want to spend the money on it, but they can help them out and write the right specs. And so you're help them with the bid process and, make sure that the project gets managed properly. So we advise them so that they send in the permission, and we expedite the approval, and then they're off and running. We don't necessarily get involved with managing the actual project, because once it's approved, they go forward. So
that's awesome. So you're pretty much there to kind of lend the hand and guide correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So what do you see is the greatest difficulty or maybe even frustration kind of with your job that you experience?
Financial issues are always challenging.
Sure.
If you go across our many, many parishes, some are very wealthy and have a strong operating plan. They operate at a surplus, and they also have good savings. And so they tend to be able to do more work with their buildings. So that, you and I've talked about deferred maintenance a lot, and, and proactively planning their capital expenses, over time. And then we have churches that are not that wealthy, and it's hard to see these buildings not getting the attention they should get. And it's no fault of anybody other than the fact that they don't have the financial resources. Sometimes they don't have the expertise they should have either. And sometimes buildings aren't top of mind to pastors because they're busy. These pastors are running all over the place, and many of them now, the way we work, we have pastors that are running multiple locations. Parishes used to be one standalone church and a rectory and a convent or a school. Now they're running, 2 or 3 or 4 churches and multiple buildings. And so, it's challenging. I get frustrated sometimes when you hear about a problem and it's far down the road, or you hear about, a project that's going to cost the parish a lot of money. And if they thought it out and were a little more proactive early on in the game, they could have saved a lot of money. I just used, like, for instance, stained glass, right? And, I've learned a lot about stained glass over the years. And, stained glass is this beautiful glass in these buildings, right? You walk in a church, and what do you see first? Especially on a sunny day, you see this magnificent stained glass. And stained glass, lasts for 100 years. It can. But you got to look at it. You got to touch it. You got to get up close and make sure that there's no problems, that you can't see the light through it, or there's no bulges, or, sometimes stained glass weren't installed properly in the first place, and they're not vented properly, and they call it warped and, cracked. And stained glass is not expensive it's not cheap to fix. But it's a heck of a lot cheaper to spend, $5,000-$10,000 maybe. I don't know what the number would be, but you spend some money and have a stained glass expert come in and assess it every few years, just to put their eyes on it and just say, you might want to touch this up or touch that up, versus having to replace a whole piece of stained glass. I replaced glass in a building for $400,000. One piece. It was a massive piece of stained, but it's like unbelievable. So this idea of deferred maintenance, and proactive maintenance of your properties is you got to be on top of it. And because it's, you need to invest in these buildings in order to help them, last longer. Just like you invest in, it's the same thing. You got to spend the money.
Yeah.
And sometimes buildings get sort of the end of the rope as far as the finances. So
yeah,
that's frustration. That's something we're trying to educate more and more all the time as far as just proactive management.
I love that. You're speaking our language.
I know.
Other than the financial restraints of certain parishes, are there any strategies, because you see the whole spectrum, are there any strategies implemented by certain parishes that you've noticed that do a phenomenal job at either capital reserves or anything else related to their facility that you just wish you could share to others?
Well, we try to share best practices as much as possible. I'm a big fan of that. We did a lot in the hotel business because, there's a lot of people that are doing really good work.
Yeah.
And some of the reasons, as I mentioned before, are because they have the financial ability to do it, they're financially healthy. They have the human resources to do it, be it they have on staff either a business manager and or a facility manager that is directing that effort. And they have the governing structure. Every church has 2 lay trustees. Every church has a finance council. Every church should have a building committee, which is different. It manages, and I can share with you our building committee outline, but which is critical. So if a parish structures themselves properly, they have the financial strength, they have the organizational strength, they have the proactive, ability to manage, then that's the way it should be. So that's what we're constantly reinforcing to parishes to get the structure in place in order to do the work. But it's hard because, these pastors are really stretched and they're working hard, and, they're trying to build the community and bring in more parishioners and do the pastoral work, the just day-to-day pastoral care that's required. And, building sometimes, they become an afterthought in a way. And so you got to keep them out in the forefront. And so we do that a lot. We have newsletters we send out. I think I sent out some of your information about, just reminding people about these kind of issues.
That's great. And I asked this because I know there's going to be a lot of facility managers that are listening to this, and a lot of them are struggling, at least some that I've talked to are struggling with, they were kind of in the position you were, being the first employee of the in your department of the Archdiocese. They're kind of coming in where Johnny used to be the facility manager for 30 years and he's retired and there was no system in place. It was all in his head. And they're at this like starting from scratch moment. Right. Because you did such a good job at developing SOPs and processes for what a so much larger of a kind of role in that sense. What would you recommend to some of these facility directors that are kind of starting from scratch in a way?
The old, I don't know if you've seen the quadrant, the know, don't know quadrant, where you know what you know, you know what you know, you don't know what you know, or you don't know what you don't know. Well, we all know what we know, I think, and it's important for people to know what they don't know, and be able to reach out and get help. And you could get help from other parishes. You can get help from consultants. I mean, again, I don't want to blow smoke with you guys, but your website and everything you offer, I mean, there's a ton of resources out there for people to be able to help them get structured. You have to start small, and just focus on, what are the needs overall. You got to know what your inventory is. You got to know what the landscape is. That's what we developed this database. We had 1,300 or so, just under 1,300 buildings that we had to get into this database so we could figure out what was what. And we still got a long way to go, but we
1,300 buildings. That's amazing to me.
Hold quite a few over the years, but anyways, so you got to sort of know the landscape, and it's always good if you're a facility manager for one property. It's one thing you can just as the old saying goes, manage by walking around, and you can see things, but also you could certainly ask folks who have been with the parish. There's some parishes have a wealth of knowledge in finance council folks or trustees. So, ask a lot of questions, and certainly you got to talk to the person in charge, that's the pastor, and find out what the direction is and what the priorities are that the pastor really wants as far as what is necessary. Let's face it, you got to make sure the lights work and the heat's on, and the property's safe, and you start with real basics, but then you really start getting into the weeds as far as understanding the systems of the building, what the strengths and weaknesses are. If you have to call in professionals to do these building assessments, for professionals like yourself, to assess what the overall situation is for the short and long-term needs of the operation, then you can sort of start strategizing longer term, what do you do in what sequence? You got short-term goals and long-term goals. Some long-term goals, could be 5 or 10 years down the road when you have to deal with things, but you got day-to-day things you got to worry about too.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And I need to be delicate about how I ask this, but a lot of the churches that I tend to speak with, they tend to prioritize their people and everything like that, as they should, invest a lot of money in that, but then they tend to invest a lot less money into facilities and being proactive about it and those kind of components. And I think a lot of them fail to realize, like, that's what your first time guests see. And that's what, that's actually outside of your staff. That's probably your biggest budget item every year.
Right.
Do you guys see something similar in your kind of world?
We need to study this a little more, and you all had some really great benchmarking material that I discovered recently, and I really need to study that more and try to look at that in relationship to our financials. We just got all of our financials of all the parishes, and I analyzed the certain line items like the utility costs or custodial or maintenance costs to see who's spending the money where. So we need to look at that a little better. The parish certainly, they have an operating budget every year. There's only so much money coming in. They can only spend so much money. So, you have to rely on them to make the right decisions as far as prioritizing. We certainly focus on safety, risk management items. Last thing you want to do is leave bad sidewalks out front, or have issues related to, paint chipping and the ceiling, something could fall, or, areas properly lit. So, you can have a pretty building, but you want to make sure you got to be sure it's safe, and it's got to be functional. You look at your major building systems, it's like, you got to prioritize, you got to have heat, and you don't want to discover you need heat in November. You don't want to discover you have a boiler problem. You should be focusing on your boilers today, once you shut them down and do the preventive maintenance and figure out what needs to be done to make sure they're functioning well for come the next heating season. Same with like roofs. Roofs are huge. It's like, you got to look at roofs all the time, and not having to be, running after a leak, but you can find leaks before they get to be a problem if you go on a roof or do the work you need to do. So I think in the end, it's emphasizing the priority and again, every parish is different. You got buildings that were built. Some of our buildings were built in the late 60s, early 70s. So they're not in bad shape versus the ones that are built, the turn of the century, and I'm talking not the 20th, late 18, early 19, these buildings are old, and, they're Gothic, and they're massive. And so those require a little more focus as far as managing the finances to make sure you have the money lined up to do the short and long-term work that needs to be done.
That's so good. One other thing I've seen lately, and maybe you haven't seen this, but I'm interested in your perspective on this, and if you have any advice in this area, is I know a lot of facility directors, they're given their own budget, and it's just extremely laughable of how much budget they're given from their pastor, executive pastor, to kind of work with. what would you tell somebody like that is if they want to approach their pastor in a sense, hey, we need to spend more money for facilities, right? Um, how would you advise somebody like that who's in that kind of predicament?
Well, you can get statistics, like you have benchmarking statistics to say the average cost for such and such is this, and we're spending X minus 20%. But when the rubber hits the road, you just look around, and you know you need to look at what the needs are. And a pastor, can look and see if a church needs to be painted, or if the floor needs to be refinished, or if the lights are on. But you have to make sure they're aware of the building envelope matters, be it the pointing and the tower and the roof and the stained glass and the HVAC systems, and just the parking lots, those bigger issues. And you got to just make your case in the end. And I recommend, facility directors need to be proactive when it comes to budgeting. They need to be be asked to be at the table to help develop budgets and make sure that, because you got history, you got how much you've spent in the past. And if you want to spend, X plus 10% the next year, you got to justify why you need to spend more money. And okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and in order to make the building safe, or in order to increase efficiencies or reduce utility costs or whatever, we want to spend this kind of money. So, you call it zero-based budgeting, if you will, or you just look at your trends, but you don't want to overspend. And, emergencies are going to come up, it's just unbudgeted expenses come up, and you got to spend the money if the building's got to stay open, and there's nothing you can do. Hopefully you have the savings in order to do it. But you want to be at the table. You want to have fact-based information when you're trying to sell your budget and sell your needs as a department. You don't want to be wasteful. And, like you said, you have to realize there's other parts of the church going on. There's other missions, between educating the young, or, helping the poor, or, just managing the day-to-day pastoral needs of the church. These churches are complicated when it comes to financials. So buildings and utility costs are just one aspect of it, but you got to make your case,
That's so good. I think that's all the questions at least I had for you, Paul. Anything else that you'd like to share to our audience, or any kind of last words of advice, or anything like that I probably may have not asked you that would be worth sharing?
I can't think of anything really. I mean, again, I'm glad that I got to find out who you all are. You guys seem like you're a good resource to churches, and you seem like you're focused on the needs, and and that's what people have to do, is reach out and look for those kind of resources, because life, these jobs are very challenging, and whatever you can do to create more efficiencies and be a sort of a lifelong learner, if you will, and not be afraid to know what you don't know, if you will. And you got to go out there and do the work and do the research, and get the job done, because people are relying on you. I mean, it's a very important position, and I think it's becoming more and more apparent how important it is. I find it, more and more people are talking about facilities than it was when the 3 or 4 years ago when we started. Part of it is because we're making people aware of it. I think we do a very good job of promoting the idea of property facility management and proactive management of these buildings, because they're assets. If you look on a balance sheet of a church, of a parish, there's a line item that shows your asset value. These are very valuable pieces of real estate. And, we want to make sure that they continue to hold their value, and you got to invest in them to hold their value. Sometimes we have to make decisions in order to monetize those properties when they're vacant. There's a lot of buildings we have that aren't utilized or not utilized at all. And so parishes really got to, because they're still expenses, even if they're unoccupied, they're still an expense. And so we try to help them proactively either look at adaptive reuse of property, or potentially marketing or leasing a property that can be used. So we monetize these assets, because you just don't want to have them sit there and be a money pit,
Right.
So it's all about being proactive and and try to have a good time doing it, because we all work very hard, and it's it can be very frustrating, but I just want people to realize that there's a lot of value in what we do as facility managers, and sometimes you don't get the pat on the back the way you'd like. It's you're an unsung hero, and but in the end, you got to take pride in knowing that your work is keeping these buildings going, bringing the faithful to our churches and our schools, etc. And it's a very, very important part of our Catholic Church, so keep up the faith, and the hard work.
That was so good.
Yeah.
I think this is going to help a lot of people, Paul. And thank you so much again for taking 45 minutes out of your day to talk to us about this. This was super helpful, even for me.
Well, it's great to talk to you, Lee. I really enjoyed getting to know you, and I'm certainly available to help people in any way I can. So anybody hearing this and they need someone to reach out to, I'm certainly available to help you in any way I can.
Awesome. I'll talk to you after, and we'll see if we can leave your email or something in the show notes and let people kind of have a way to contact you there. It's great. Awesome. Thank you again, everybody. We'll catch you next time.